so I served as a bishop for 12 years, and people would say, "Oh, tell me what's going on in the churches." And I'd say, "You really need to talk to the pastors." So I'm looking at my Zoom here, and you as brothers and sisters, I'm saying, if you want 5 practical things, you on the Zoom should be answering that, because you're the ones that roll up your sleeves and do it every day. But I'll just kind of step back from my perspective. Um, and you said practical. I guess we'll determine at the end whether they're practical or not. But here's kind of 5 that come to mind. I was just pondering on this the other day. In my role as a business guy, in my role as a church planner, in my role as a bishop and kind of a nonprofit executive, I'm often asking Jesus to bless and join me in what I'm doing. I think it's just the opposite in unity. We don't have a mission we're asking Jesus to join. Jesus has a mission he's asking us to join. We don't need to convince Jesus of unity. That's the heart of Jesus. That's John 17. And the reminder for me in city unity, because unity is hard work, and I'll talk about that second, is that this is Jesus' mission he's inviting me into. And if he's for it, then I can be for it. I don't need to ask him to come alongside me. He's asking me to come alongside him. So I live in the city of Philadelphia, which is the poorest, largest city in the United States. It's 50% Caucasian and 50% other cultural groups. And there's a lot of division, and even inside the body of Christ. And as we work at unity in Philadelphia, and I'm a part of the core team there, I'm just reminded this is the heart of Jesus. If I'm on this tandem bicycle, I'm not driving this tandem bicycle. I'm in the back seat, and Jesus is the one who's driving. So I need to remind myself of that all the time in city movement work. Jesus is ahead of me. Jesus is inviting me. This is his mission. It's not mine. So that's, whether that's practical or not, I grew up on a farm. That's the garden out of which city movement work grows. It's his mission. It's not my mission. And the reason here's the second thing, the reason why that's important for me is because I'm convinced again and again that the enemy loves division. And just when you think you have it solved here, it pops up over here. And it's, unfortunately, it's not just within our city, it's within us in the body of Christ. And I don't like it, but it doesn't surprise me. And every time it rears its head, and sometimes, honestly, brothers and sisters, it rears its head in me, I have to say the enemy loves division. I was doing one of my doctoral courses was with a pastor from Denver, Colorado. His name is Robert Gelinas, great pastor. And we began to talk about unity in his city of Denver. And he said, here's where God has called me. I will never throw mud at any church in the body of Christ in Denver. I will never throw mud at them. So we're sitting there in class, and some of them came from that city. I didn't. And one of the persons in the class said, well, but what about that church? Like, they're kind of on the fringe. What about them? And he goes, let me say it again. I will never throw mud at any church in the body of Christ in Denver. Well, what about that church? And he goes, let me say it again. I will never throw mud. The enemy loves division. And sometimes it can seep into my own spirit. Even as one who's deeply committed to unity, I find myself thinking, what about them? I meet with a small group every 2 weeks. One is a former mayor of Philadelphia who's African-American. He's 82, and a number of pastors and leaders, nonprofit leaders who are white, one who's Korean, one who's just 2 who are Hispanic. And we begin to tell our stories. And we often have to apologize to each other because we form caricatures in our mind of what the other is like. And I'm just reminded again and again that the enemy loves division. So that's kind of the second thing I'd say, Andy. Third, unity has to be more than a concept. It has to be about working together to address stubborn realities. And again, I follow some of you, so I know the stubborn realities that you're working in your city. But I really believe that people in a city, whether they follow Jesus or not, by and large, 90% of them, 95% of them really want a good city. I mean, they really do want a good city. And we can address what the stubborn realities are in our city, but we can't address them all. But as a body of Christ, we can address some key ones together. And I think it's really identifying for a city, what are the key stubborn realities we want to face. So Dallas, Texas, which has more churches, I think, per capita than any city in the United States, and more big churches. Like a church of 1,500 is like, it's an okay sized church in Dallas. They have 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. They did some research before their first movement day to find out what really are the problems in Dallas. They found out they were number 2 in the United States for sex trafficking. They had no idea. So they said, how do we as a body of Christ really address that? In New York City, more recently, we've said, what's it mean for the combined body of Christ to address foster kids? Because in the US, 75% of all the males that are in prison were foster children. 60% of all of the sex trafficked females were foster children. 50% of the 500,000 homeless were foster children. So we said, how do we in New York City, and we're beginning to create a strategic plan, work together as the combined body of Christ to address the foster care system and rescue children? For Philadelphia, it's how do we address the racial divide in the body of Christ, not just in the city, but how do we address it in the body of Christ, and how do we build bridges? I think it was Tim Keller who said, God calls us to build bridges across generations, across cultures, across denominations. But he said, then he looked at us in the room and he said, just remember, bridges are meant to be walked on. So when you build bridges, you'll be walked on occasionally. So I think the practical thing for me is unity isn't just a theological concept. And I'm looking at Lloyd Cook, and Lloyd knows this, I mean, so well. You have to address the practical issues in the city. Last night we met in Manchester. It was the Movement for Recovery. It was one of the first meetings, and it was very practical on how do we address some of the stubborn realities that really need to take place in Manchester. So I'm just really encouraged. And I think sometimes when business leaders see unity happening in cities, they always hop to the question, so what difference is it making? What are you addressing? Are you just getting together for tea or coffee, or are you actually working together for the good of the city? And that's just a real practical thing. Can I give a couple more, Andy? Is that all right? I think a fourth I'd say is leadership that is courageous and humble. Have to be courageous. Unity's hard work. I mean, Jesus is for it and the enemy's against it. And you have to be courageous as a city movement leader, but you have to be humble. The moment a city starts to think that the unity movement is about you as a leader, you're dead in the water. And most of us are leaders, so we're used to kind of championing things. And I say city movement is really about championing other people and being very careful that it doesn't become about championing you as a leader. So Mac Pierce, some of you know Mac. Mac was our founder at Movement Day. And Mac would go around the city and, he'd talk to somebody. He said, I'd like us to bring together. And they say, well, I have this vision for the city. And Mac would say, well, let's help that vision live. And then he'd go to a nonprofit leader and he'd say, I'd love us to come together in the city. And the nonprofit leader would say, but I have this vision for the city. And Mac would say, let's help that vision live. So unity movement is really about championing other people and being very careful that it doesn't become about championing us. So this incredible blend of courage mixed with personal humility. We've all seen churches, and it's not, we've seen lots of them in the US, but I suspect it even happens even here in the UK, is where a pastor really good-hearted and he's a courageous leader, but suddenly there becomes a shift. And their church is really about him or her. And city movement activity is really about championing other people. So I just encourage you in that, and you're a great model to that. So the fifth one's really personal, if I can, Andy. And it's making sure that I keep short accounts with people. Like I'm a person. I like to lead. I have ideas. I have opinions. And as I said, the enemy loves division. And I have to be very committed every single day before Jesus, that I'm not just committed to unity across the divides in the city, but that unity reigns in my heart. I can get sideways with people. I can find myself saying, I just really wish the Pentecostals were a little bit more like Presbyterians. I really wish the Presbyterians would get a little bit more live sometimes and be more like the Pentecostals. And I wish. And, people will say to me, well, why don't you speak out against this group of Christians? And why don't you speak out against this group of Christians? And I find myself saying, God, I need to have a spirit of unity in my own heart. When Jesus said, my prayer is that they will be one, it was a theological concept, because he said, the Father and I are one. So how do I keep that spirit of unity maintaining in me? So I think the practical point for me is I always need to be before Jesus and have a forgiving spirit. And I need to maintain a heart of joy. Joy is infectious. Roger and I took Roger on quite a journey this morning. I had to go get my lateral flow test so I could be inside the UK, even though I'd been here for 2 days. And then we needed to circle around, and I needed to get my PCR test so I can get back into the States tomorrow. So we were at Manchester Airport circling around for tests. It was quite an experience. But the guy that met us at the first test, he was so joyful. He just made it a pleasant day. And I need to remind myself that even though unity work is sometimes hard work, joy is infectious. So I can't let the hard work of unity seep my joy and me being infectious to other people. So those are kind of 5 thoughts I had on city movement activity. Whether they're practical or not, I don't know, Andy.